Hello and welcome to the final paper 3 revision video, which will focus on the first section of the exam on the pre-release material to do with Tudeley Village. Now, throughout this section, there are going to be a number of 9, 6 and lower tariff answer questions that will relate to the pre-release booklet, a lot of which you will have prepared for in advance, but hopefully this video goes over some of the key themes and some of the key things to look out for as we go. Now, the whole idea behind the Tudeley Village is to produce a sustainable settlement that meets or helps to negate the housing demands facing the country at the moment. And the UK has extremely strict planning laws that make building new developments like this very, very difficult. And it should come as no surprise, therefore, that this proposal was actually rejected. Nonetheless, we need to look at the features of the scheme and see if we actually agree with that decision to not let it go ahead in the future. Now, the first thing to look at then is, if we've got this brand new village, why build it in the first place? Well, the UK is unfortunately facing a housing crisis. Housing is not meeting the demands of a growing population, and therefore they are facing greater and greater problems. If the UK needs 240,000 new homes every year, and we are only building 100,000, that is a significant gap between what people need and what they are able to be provided with. Looking at simple supply and demand, that also means that if more people want the houses and there are less houses available, the price of the house will go up. If the price of the house goes up, it becomes less affordable. So people that maybe could have afforded a house 15, 20 years ago, despite saving up enough money, are now unable to afford housing. So, if I carry on, to deal with this problem, what the government are trying to do is they are trying to find new ways to build housing. And one of the big themes in that is something called urban sprawl. And that's the uncontrolled growth of cities out into green belt or greenfield land, otherwise known as the countryside. Now, urban sprawl is necessary with population growth, but it also leads to some pretty big environmental impacts, which we'll go through throughout this video. And the Tudeley Village proposal itself is an example of urban sprawl. It's built out into the greenbelt land, as you can see, with the agricultural land around it, and in the centre we've got our kind of houses, our village greens, our communities, our open space, etc. And in this booklet, in this exam, you will get asked a number of 1, 2, 3 and 4 mark questions, like this one here, relating to the village. Now, anything kind of 4 marks or less, the answers can be found in the pre-release booklet that you get in the exam. So, for example, if you were to get a question suggesting how the Tudeley Village proposed development had been designed to blend in with the countryside, in the pre-release booklet, there are multiple bullet points throughout it that will give you answers such as new buildings are designed to blend into the local architecture using traditional materials, for example. Again, 3 marks, 2 marks, 1 marks, maybe even 4. The answers are going to be in the pre-release booklet for you to find, and maybe have to add a little bit of explanation on as and when. But the biggest problem, really, at the core of this issue is, should we be building into greenbelt land if we are facing a housing crisis? Should we as a country be sacrificing the environment for the economic and social benefits that new housing schemes would provide? And what makes that kind of decision even worse for the environment, really, is that building on that rural-urban fringe, building in those greenbelt lands, is very, very, very strong and very good if you're a developer trying to make lots of money, lots of profits. For example, the land in greenbelt areas is incredibly cheap. the reason why it's so cheap is you don't really have to do much with it. You can get your bulldozer in, you can remove all the green space, you can build whatever you want. It's a really attractive environment. I mean, if you were going to build a brand new town in this greenbelt land here, it's a really nice place to live, a really attractive place to live as well. Not only that, is you can build whatever you want. It's basically a blank canvas. Once you've removed this green area, you've got a blank canvas, as I just said, to build whatever you want. If you want to build a row of 5-bed houses with a double garage and a swimming pool, you can build it. If you want to build a block of flats, you can build it. There are very few restrictions on what you can and can't do. And so if you're a property developer, the people that build these homes, greenbelt land is very, very attractive. However, obviously, that is at the cost of the environment in most cases. And sometimes those costs do outweigh the actual benefits. Now, within the pre-release, we've just spoken about greenfield sites there, where we talked about the no limitations to size and design, land is cheaper, and we've talked about the fact that the kind of environment is damaged. But the other thing that's mentioned quite a lot are these brownfield sites. Now, a brownfield site is a former industrial area. So a brownfield site is a former industrial area that was once maybe an old factory or an old manufacturing site that has disappeared or been run down. So, for example, Everton's new stadium at Bramley Moor Dock is being built partly on what's called a brownfield site. Now, building on brownfield sites is significantly more sustainable than building on greenfield sites because you don't have to go into these green areas and demolish them. In addition to that, they often have pre-existing transport infrastructure in place, like roads and rail, etc., electricity, sewage, that means the kind of entire area is more suited to be built on. There's less destruction needed to create it. However, they're not always in the most desirable parts of a city. They could be in areas of quite high crime, which may deter potential buyers, make less profit for the developers, but also as well, they're often contaminated with quite dangerous waste. If it's a former chemical factory, for example, you're not going to have a huge amount of safe areas initially. It's quite expensive and quite time consuming to really clean them up and make sure they're available for building on. Now, if you'd like to pause the video here, there are 2 examples of 6 markers I can ask you about. The first one is asking about greenfield sites, and the second one refers to brownfield sites. Either could very easily be a 6-mark question that would require you to do both sides of the argument. So question 1 about greenfield sites, question 2 about brownfield sites. Okay, so the next key part is addressing whether this village is actually sustainable or not. Now, the idea of sustainability is that people can be economically prosperous, they can gain wealth, they can gain education, they can be healthy now and in the future without destroying the environment in the process. So, for example, mining for oil or drilling for oil is not sustainable because while it provides us with economic benefit now, it damages the environment for the future, and in the long term, it won't continue to create benefits. The Tudeley village on the surface looks very, very sustainable. And throughout the pre-release booklet, there are loads of examples as to why it is sustainable. But there are some real drawbacks, real caveats with the scheme that maybe mean that that's not necessarily the case. From an environmental standpoint, there's absolutely loads of things that make it sustainable. There's a solar farm to generate electricity. They really, really, really push public transport and cycling, which will limit carbon footprint, which will limit the impact of releasing CO2 and enhancing the greenhouse effect. However, because of all the people moving to this village, there's going to be a massive increase in traffic congestion, increase in air pollution, and no matter what we do to try and preserve the environment, building on greenbelt land always damages the environment. It always damages habitats, no matter how careful you try to be, because you are disrupting nature. From an economic standpoint, and here's my favourite term again, we've got these multiplier effects. We've got an affordable housing plan is included to try and make it affordable for people with lower incomes. We've got commercial building spaces, including shops, that provide job opportunities and multiplier effects. But others would argue that all these new jobs in this village might reduce jobs elsewhere, which would cause a cycle of decline for other nearby towns and villages. And finally, on a social standpoint, the village has a lot of features that in theory will improve people's health and their education. They've got a brand new village green for recreational space and exercise. There's a cricket club which will improve their physical and mental health through exercise. They've also got 2 brand new schools opening in the area, so that children that are living in this village will have a nice short commute to a school to provide themselves with an education. All of these things would suggest, with the green space, with the exercise in place, there'll be less adults and kids that are ill, better school and work attendance, but obviously all of this is circumvented by the increase in traffic congestion or the arguments from elsewhere. There is a little bit of a Hail Mary, though, that is hidden away in this pre-release that I will come back to. A lot of the things they want to build, and a lot of things they want to spend lots of money on, they don't actually have to build until they've already built 1,900 homes. So in the short term, I don't think it is sustainable. Until they build 1,900 houses, they don't have to build all the other brilliant green energy plans or all the other social plans, or they don't have to preserve anything until they hit that point. Okay? So in the short term, it's not sustainable. Maybe in the long term, it is. So, 6th marker again. Why is it difficult to make housing developments truly sustainable? And again, all you would really do in this answer is go back to this table, look at the feature, explain why it is sustainable, and then argue why things stop it being truly sustainable. Because nothing can be truly sustainable, really. And if you are going for grade 7, 8 or 9, you also want to make sure that you've got some really, really good conclusions or conclusive statements in your answers. And I've kind of pre-done some that you can attach to certain questions if and when they come up. So, I do think that the range of features meet the characteristics of a sustainable settlement. There's environmental, there's social, there's economic factors really, really, really strong. However, some features are not implemented until 1,900 houses have been constructed. That is not sustainable in the short term. And I would also add as well that construction on a greenfield site will lead to a loss of biodiversity and habitats, regardless of how sustainable other aspects of the plan are. And those examples there in green and yellow are examples of judgment, of evaluation that you can use when it comes to questions about sustainability and whether you think the village should be built at all. Now, the only other real thing here before we get to the final question to look at are the range of different views on this proposal. Now, as with any issue in life, there are always going to be people that have differing opinions, and everyone will have a reason for their opinion. So, for example, if you are trying to explain why Jurgen Klopp is a good football manager, you might point to the success he's had with 2 football clubs, the multiple Champions League finals he attended and got to, the way he turned around Liverpool Football Club. Critics of Jurgen Klopp would have a different view. They would say that he loses most of his major finals. They would say that he spent a huge amount of money to achieve 1 Premier League title. The same thing will come into play here with Tudeley Village, because different people will have different opinions. If you are a home buyer, you don't really care, I don't think, necessarily about whether greenbelt land was destroyed. You want an affordable house. If you're the property developer or a local business, You want profit. So your opinion will firmly be based on making money. If you're a local protection group like the CPRE, you might care more about the environment than you do about profit, than you do about anything else. And finally, the Save Capel group, our favourite NIMBY group, they might have their own interests at heart over the bigger issues for the country. They might be more focused on keeping their back garden clear of congestion, keeping their countryside as it is, as opposed to letting new development happen. And there could be conflict here between the different groups, because whenever people have different opinions, there are always going to be conflicts. For example, business owners could have conflicts. Some would argue that it will increase customers and boost the local economy. However, others argue that it could take away existing business and could create additional traffic. The Save Capel group argue there's going to be more congestion. There's not enough infrastructure in the plan. The house prices will not be affordable. It's going to destroy habitats, loss of protected species, destruction of footpaths, flood risk increasing. But we have to remember that even though their opinion is important, housing development has to happen somewhere. If we've got a housing crisis in this country, it is wrong to suggest that you just have to stop building everywhere, because otherwise the country will not progress. Otherwise, the housing crisis will not be solved. So someone is always unhappy in any decision. In particular, the Save Capel group here. Even though they are quite happy at the moment because the development's been stopped, but they might be coming back into play in the future. And then finally, to end this video, nice and short and sweet, you will be asked to make a decision on this issue. The last 9-mark question, 9 plus 3 spikes to 12 marks, will ask you to weigh up all the arguments and make a decision on something. They might ask you whether you think the UK housing crisis means that building on greenfield sites is necessary. And you would argue both sides of the argument and give some good judgment. They might argue, or they may ask you, whether the plan is sustainable or not. And you would have to argue with different aspects of sustainability and give a nice conclusion at the end. Or, most likely, they will ask whether the local council was right to halt the plans for the development. Were they right to say, no, we are not going to build this? And I'm going to let you pause the video for the next 3 slides, really, because I don't want to just talk through every factor, but there are loads of arguments for building Tudeley Village, and there are equal arguments against building Tudeley Village. There is no right answer, but make sure you have a couple of arguments in your head before you go in the exam, so you can really make sure that you spend most of your time actually getting those thoughts down on paper, not rushing through the pre-release booklet trying to find information. On the next 2 slides, I also give 2 example 12 out of 12 answers. The first one, which actually disagrees and thinks the village should be built, and the second one, which actually agrees that it shouldn't have been built. And what I will point out on both these questions are that it looks at both sides of the argument, both for building the village and against it. It also offers some really good judgment and evaluation. And at the very bottom, it provides a suggestion. And that's a really good way of giving extra points to the examiner. Challenge them. If you're saying that you want to build or you don't want to build it, what else could they do? To limit the damage, there are a substantial number of brownfield sites in the north due to the legacy of deindustrialisation that could perhaps be used in collaboration with greenfield development. That is grade 9 analysis that you can pre-do. Now, obviously, it's no guarantee that this final question comes up, which these 2 answers are written for, but I think both apply for sustainability. It might be a bit of rewording for whether the housing should be done or not. Okay? So you can read through these answers, pause the video for this one and this one. I'd maybe learn one of them in case that question comes up. And other than that, go back through it and really think about these 3 questions here. Do you think that we should build on greenfield sites to meet the housing crisis demand? Do you think it is sustainable, and were they correct? Thank you for watching again, and best of luck in your exams.